And we're live with another Alta3 live stream. Good evening, everyone. So tonight we're actually going to study the do's and don'ts of Ansible, otherwise known as Alta3 Ansible Law. And we're going to learn why some things work for us and why some things don't. Ultimately, this is a best practices discussion, largely based on the school of very hard knocks. Now, you should know that the project that we were working on was our training platform, actually building our student environments from the ground up and the software that actually puts all that stuff in place. So when you attend Alta3 labs and you're clicking around watching videos, or you're actually doing the labs, or you're actually keying stuff on the screen, that's because of a lot of playbooks that put a lot of software in place. And for the most part, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 Ansible modules did most of the work. Now, I'm going to go down through them and just point out how we use them sort of as a best practices. Keep in mind, this presentation is intended for people that already know Ansible. This is definitely not a get acquainted with Ansible discussion here. So we use debug as almost one of the first calls. It's one of the first modules in every playbook and every role. And we debug all the variables that we know that role is going to require. The reason for this is that we provide the variables in a dynamic way. And there's no way to look ahead of time to make sure they're there or not. So our solution is debug them and simply explode, fail in a, well, just go like a manhole cover with a drag chute. Go right straight down if the variables aren't there. Copy, yeah, sure. Just move files from one place to another with all of the credentials and with chones and chmod stuff in place. File, we use that to set up directories for the most part. Apt is our installs. You know what? While we're talking about apt install, we all know what that does, but we have developed a pet peeve on this. Please don't install apt nginx and then in the name say install nginx. Oh my God. No kidding. I mean, you can you can read, it says it right there. So why are you installing nginx? Because a better answer would be, in order to support remote console, we need nginx. Tell me why you're apt installing, not the fact that you are. The self-documentation of Ansible will do that. Get URL. You can't beat Ansible's version of a wget. And get clone we use to pull in other repositories. All right, template. Okay, here we go. When you use a template, most likely you're filling out a config file. Listen to me closely on this one. It is very tempting. The more rookie you are, the more you want to use the line in file. I get it. You're like, but I only want to change this one line. That's all I want to change. And at first, it sounds very tempting. Let me tell you why that's a bad idea. Number one, you didn't look at the rest of the config. And are there other things that you should be changing, or did you just change that one thing? If there's certain defaults that you want to be in place, line and file is not going to do that. If you're going to use line and file to expose an IP address, did you check and see if all the other IP addresses which are exposed are gone or not? If you do line and file, you won't. Ultimately, the reason that line and file is in the explicitly forbidden is because we have learned through the school of massive hard knocks is you take the config file, reduce it down to, like, basically they're ini files, reduce it down to the stuff that matters, and this like 100 line ini file turns into like 5 or 6 lines. Fill it out as a Jinja template and run it home. We get great results when we do that, and we wind up with very readable config files. You can't beat tar and untarring, And Ansible does that fine with archive and unarchive. Oh man, Sean, what's our systemd unit file skills compared to where they were like 3 months ago?
I'll give them.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, our unit files were abysmal. Oh, they were bad. We write template files, and some of the best code we've written is Ansible. Just Sean just pushed a file that actually had a playbook in a playbook that was super cool, and then system control, of course, to control time zone, to set the time zones on machines we're launching. Authorized key is a sort of a bootstrap method that we use to get the right RSA keys there in the first place. Then we have a Python script called GetHuggers that actually maintains it. Now, that brings us down to pip before I get into the explicitly forbidden. My personal least favorite, I don't know, Sam, Sean, where are you guys on the pip scene? Yeah, down. So to properly use pip, you should be a master of the virtual environment. You should know the 5 ways that it's done. You should understand it backwards, sideways, up, and down. You should be able to install. You know what? You know what's really good? If you use pip and install it with root privileges and clobber stuff that's being managed by an apt, and just hose your system so badly that the only way you can fix it is to delete it and put it back again. And eventually you will realize there's a right and a wrong way to use pip and a right and a wrong way to install Python. And I'm pretty sure that we've uncovered every possible way to do it wrong. But in the process of doing that, which I believe is a rite of passage, we've learned how to use pip. The one warning I will tell you is, because you can tell the way I'm talking, we obviously haven't quite perfected it, but I feel like pip is not always idempotent. If I use pip to install using Vend, for instance, and then I use some other virtual environment tactic under a different user, it wants to install it in the old place instead of the new place. And I find it incredibly frustrating. On the other hand, when we use pip on a native install, on the very first time, it works every time. So nevertheless, still pip is better than attempting to do it, for instance, with shell, which we'll get to. What? Go ahead.
My question is more on your experience with these, but from a management perspective, talk to why you're saying you can use these, and I see in the next chunk why you're, let's not use these. What's the management reasoning for that?
Sure. Yeah, actually, there's a real good one. Mostly because these are the alternatives, the primary alternatives to the explicitly forbidden. And we also felt that these not only were the most popular, but let's get good at these, because I now all of these are so simple until you build entire systems, and you realize that less is more. That's the whole reason. Is we wanted to do really good code reviews on as limited as possible Ansible modules, and we're basically installing Enchilada from the ground up, and for the most part, with a few alternatives, with a few exceptions, these were sufficient to do everything. That's why. So I know that's kind of a flimsy reason, Zach, but it's working for us. It is the point. So in the explicitly forbidden, let me put command and shell in the same category. And there's a couple of things you need to know. Ansible's not perfect. There's not a module for everything. For instance, we build our virtual machines with native QEMU. So there is no Ansible module for that. I'm not sure there ever will be. So we have to use the command module for that. But in talking with shell, yeah, this is a hard one for everyone. In fact, Inyo Squirrel Toya, have you met him? Chad, have you ever met Inyo Squirrel Toya? No. Well, he said that my name is Inyo Squirrel Toya. You killed my shell scripts. Prepare to die. Obviously from The Princess Bride, but he's not taking it. Oh, you're muted.
Don't worry about it. It's just being funny.
Yeah, okay, no worries. So, okay, you know what? Shell scripts are darn convenient. I mean, and in fact, I'll tell you that in retrospect, there's some things that in fact, I'll just flat out say the right way to do it is do it manually, and it'll look something like that. Probably script it and live. Here's the mistake that we made, in my opinion. Live with the script for some period of time until the script is fully debugged, until this just works, because it won't necessarily work instantly. Now, in this particular case, Sam will know what I'm talking about. This is the installation of the Enchilada platform. And once the shell script is fully and thoroughly debugged, just look at that shell script now and then compare it to what it looks like with Ansible. Even if you didn't understand Ansible, you can see why, wow, this suddenly looks readable. But you'll notice in this example, which I didn't write, I think this metadata here could be a little better as to, like, ensure passenger apt is it song. Okay, app repository, state present. I can already read that. It's and this, I guess that's sufficient, but this is a good example of why Ansible's looking a whole lot better than Shell. But it should be like the third step after you have everything kind of bulletproof. Once you do, you're pretty much convinced this will work. And I want you to notice that nowhere are you seeing the Shell module being called out. So I'd explicitly like to say that if you're going to make the leap from Shell to Ansible, then give up on Shell and command. Now, not to make this a Ansible commercial, but I just want to focus on this because there's a lot of reasons to use Ansible. But which method can be run multiple times safely and with confidence? Probably not the shell script without a lot of work, because to make it idempotent is tricky. Nevertheless, you might be faced with that. So as an example of what you're getting into, if there is no other way, you feel like I have to use shell. Well, okay. I don't believe that. I think there's a way around it. It just might be beyond our skill level right now, but let's say you have to. Well, one way to do it is this little example. Now, Guy, have you ever heard of AptMark? You guys ever heard of that? Have you ever used that, Sean?
A few times, yeah.
Figures. Okay, well, that was actually a new one for me. I've never needed it. It was an easy Google search. It simply means that in this case, I want to install Docker CE. I want to install that. And once I install it in a certain version, I never want it removed. I never want it upgraded. You cannot do anything apt unless I take the hold off. So all I want to do is put a hold on this. Basically, that last command right there is what I want. Now, what would happen if I skip all of this and I just run that after this shell command? Would the result be yellow or green every time this shell script or this shell command runs? What do you think?
Yellow.
Oh, definitely. yeah. YMCA. Yeah. Okay. No, that's not the right answer. Yes, it is the right answer, Sam. But that's not. I don't want this to run if it doesn't have to. So here is a trick, and I don't want you to think I'm condoning shell. I'm just saying that if you're insisting on doing this, then you better write better code. So here it's @mark show holds. Then we pipe that into grep, run it through grep, and of course we look for Docker CE. Now, if this is true, the result will be 0. That's interesting because only if the result is 0 do you get through that and sign. See, sort of like a rite of passage. If what the previous guy did was the result code was 0, which means it worked, then do this, which means echo hold it, which is fine. Gave it something to do. The pipe means else. If it fails, then run the @mark Docker C. What do you think of that, Sam?
That's pretty convenient.
Yeah. And now what'll happen if Docker CE is installed? Green or yellow?
Green. It won't run. It'll be okay.
Yeah. And it'll register the Docker hold, and the result is green. At least this is idempotent. So there's way more to it than that, but I thought this was just an example of if you're going to use the shell command, you just can't stop there. You have to do more work, because when we run our playbooks, we want to see nothing but green, or at least install circuit breakers if we can't check for idempotency. Idempotency means, by the way, you don't get terrified when you run a playbook against a working system that you think you're going to wreck it. That should never happen. Circuit breaker means I'm going to make sure the playbook never runs against something because I know it will break it, because it'll reset something or whatever. All right. That being said, some shell command stuff. I thought this was interesting in the few minutes we have here. Check out the first bullet. I couldn't agree more with this guy. The main source of chaos if used inaccurately. So the rules, look at the second bullet right here. If they are idempotent, find a way to report the changes. Don't ever run anything if it's already been run. Number 2, when it does run, make sure it ran and it actually worked, because Ansible modules will do that, but shell won't. So, in the time that I have, that's what you need to think about in all of this. I think we'll leave it go at that one. Then finally, and mopping it up on the shell command, idempotency is the name of the game. Each task or fail should change something with success or no change, or be skipped, which means, you know what? I could just boil it down and say no yellows on the second run of the playbook. No yellows, nothing but greens is like, that's Ansible law at Alta3. So in that regard, then we're testing for stability, audit, handlers calls, and ultimately I'd like to introduce a term that was taught to me 40 years ago. It's a term called bulletproof code. And it means no matter what you throw at it, it runs reliably and safely. Now, along those lines, one last thing in the few minutes we have here, and that's how to use Ansible's inline module. So this Michael Trajanic on quite some time ago wrote a really nice article on Ansible's inline module. You guys should read it. Just Google the title, How to Use Ansible's Inline Module in a Bulletproof Way. And after you read this, you will say to yourself, I will never use the line and file module. I will use a template, because what this guy's suggesting is crazy. But yeah, it's my goal to show you this. So let me just skip it down to why you might do it. If you have different roles modifying the same file, my first thought is then write better roles. But you might be forced to. You're dealing with legacy systems that different, they deal with the same template in a different way, and it doesn't look the same. Okay. And if you're dealing with target systems with different versions of the file, yeah, okay. But here's the thing, at Alta3, we never have any of those. So that's not a satisfactory argument. But what this guy does, as you read on down through, he said, suppose I want to actually make that address applied. So I do my line and file command where I say, look for this value. and make sure it's present. Well, guess what? That didn't check. That did not check to see if 0000 was turned on. It only checked this. So you wind up, as you read through the article, it said, well, then what you're actually going to have to do is in the regular expression, you're going to have to check if this is available and if that is available. But if this is available, then you have to do that. And before you know it, you say, oh my gosh, this would be much easier to just write a Jinja template, be done with it. And so that's why, reading this, if after reading all this, you're not a believer in, okay, line of file is not a winner for me, then, then you have to go through a lot of work to make line and file bulletproof. And by the way, block and file actually follows the same thing. So probably of the number one hot buttons, at least for me, those two are it. And I would go as far as to say, I think line and file is also a terrible shortcut that you would take before you would actually learn everything about the config file that you're trying to change. Set fact usually means we're looking up something that we should have figured out prior to getting there. Block and file is simply line and file for the same reason. Raw, yeah. The reason that we don't use raw and reboot is because it normally means that we had to do something even definitely not idempotent, that there's almost no way to be at that point. The solution is find a better way. So we actually came up with, Sean and I spent a couple weeks on a process to actually boot a server, a fully functioning bare metal server that was ready to take Ansible commands right out of the chute. It reduced one boot cycle. And Sean, what's our current load time from 0 to hero?
For a full-blown enchilada?
Yeah, and make sure you put enough time in for a coffee break and stuff like that.
I'd say about 2 hours.
Yeah.
For our entire cloud to.
Yeah, to put the entire cloud back.
Yeah.
With Aspirate, do you think we'll ever hit an hour?
Probably next month.
Yeah, so then you wonder, is it worth it at that stage of the game? But the code definitely needs some work. And ultimately, that's the last thing, is if you want to write really good Ansible code, don't try to do it yourself. That you need a team to get good at this. And we can save this for another discussion. I think it's important, is ultimately how to work as a team, how to do pull requests, and how to supply information back and forth to each other that your code will just get remarkably better and better. So there you have it. Lastly, I will tell you that we have summarized Ansible law in one grep command. We just look for this stuff and systematically purge it. And then it's a matter of running the playbook, looking for idempotency, that's yellow things. Once the yellow things are all scrapped out, then you add circuit breakers. That means you forbid code from running that you absolutely positively are fearsome of something in place that you know you're going to take out. And at that point, ask for the pull and run the tests and pull it in. You're going to wind up with great code. For the good of the union, anything else, guys?
I think we can get rid of line and file in the SUMI report.
Yes, and actually produce a much more readable because it'd be in the right order.
Yep, absolutely.
I've been thinking of that.
Yep, get rid of that exception.
Yeah, I'm curious, Zach and Chad, too advanced to have this kind of discussion with our Ansible classes, right? Are people coming in?
In my class, which is I'm teaching this week, a Mastering Ansible class. There's a bunch of managers that actually want to know how to scale Ansible into enterprise level. So Most classes, yeah, I think this is too much, but for the
Yeah.
purposes of some of my students this week, it actually fits the bill pretty well.
Oh, well, what we did is it's actually on our repo in the docs folder at Alta3. For those of you joining, and this is a private repo that we just place all our docs in one flat file and then reference it because we can find it easier that way. All right, well, yeah, I'm ready to call it if you guys are. All good?
Yep. Thank you.
Bye,
Appreciate it.
everyone.
See ya.